I will call this meeting to order. It's a council committee meeting. And if somebody would be so kind as to make a motion to approve the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Campbell, Sir David, and thank you, Mason. Any comments? All in favor? Carried, thank you. Any disclosures of interest based on the agenda before you? Sorry, Rob, was that a hand up?
No, that's okay, Mayor Clark.
Thank you. With respect to the minutes, February 1st, 2021, Council Committee, would somebody make a motion to put those on the floor for approval? Thank you, David. Thank you, Ted. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Great. There are no closed session items that I'm aware of. Consent agenda, not today. Board reports, same thing, but we do have a council referral with respect to building additional pollinator gardens. And I believe this is where I will invite Mr. McMullen to introduce this particular issue. If you would read this report, Mr. McMullen.
Thank you. So, the purpose of this report is to respond to a referral from council regarding pollinator gardens. The city of Orillia became a bee city in 2019 and encourages raising public awareness of pollinator diversity and the benefits of pollinating plants. The city of Orillia presently maintains more than 70 annual and perennial gardens, 3 butterfly and bee gardens, and 2 community gardens. The city's horticulture, arboriculture, and maintenance programs are involved in growing, planting, and maintaining city gardens, trees and shrubs, park spaces, and natural areas. The horticulture area also operates 2 greenhouses, and arboriculture maintains park trees and operates the city's tree donation and replacement programs. The city of Orillia does not use pesticides in normal parks and trails operations. Improvements to existing planting beds are accomplished on an as-needed basis. This includes new plantings and the repair of garden supports such as garden walls, rockery, topsoils, drainage, and other associated items. Council's continued support for the city's horticulture and arboriculture efforts does currently benefit pollinators and will continue to do so. The cost of constructing new perennial planting beds is presently $30 a square foot. This does not include associated improvements such as benches or pathways. The building of any new gardens would be funded through the city's capital budget. The maintenance of gardens and planting beds is funded from the city's operating budget. Presently, park staff and the equipment that are used to maintain planted areas and gardens are at capacity, and the addition of new gardens would require additional staff and equipment resources. Identified as strategy 1 in the staff report, the most attainable strategy available is continued support for the city's ongoing efforts. Continuing to support the city's seasonal planting and maintenance of flower gardens and hanging baskets. Continuing to support the city's community gardening program. Continuing to invest in managing these green assets through regular maintenance, renovation, and restoration. In addition, public education opportunities can be explored, and expanding naturalized areas or establishing no-mow zones can be reviewed more closely to help support pollinating plants. Identified as strategy 2 in the staff report is the expansion of existing efforts. This would require the city to invest in building and planting additional pollinator gardens, establishing additional naturalized areas where possible, and possibly adopting new mowing practices. Presently, with current staffing and equipment resources, there are limits to how many more gardens could be built and managed in the city's park system. Establishing new naturalized areas would require a review of the city's parks to identify appropriate locations and would require an amendment to the city's weed bylaw. As identified in the staff report, the Environmental Advisory Committee met in January to discuss pollinator gardens and are supportive of the ongoing efforts. Sustainable Orillia also discussed pollinator gardens in January and noted their support for ongoing efforts and provided comments, which are included in the staff report. B-City Orillia was also contacted and expressed support for the work the city is doing to promote pollinator gardens and habitat creation. In the staff report, staff have recommended that staff be directed to complete a review of the city's parks, trails, recreation centers, parking lots, and other public spaces to identify existing gardens that could be enhanced to provide additional habitat for pollinators. And that staff also be directed to consider the establishment of new pollinator gardens and habitat in naturalized areas and when those areas are scheduled for refurbishment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Very much appreciated. I've heard a little bit of discussion, so I'm not sure there is a recommended motion by staff. Unless I see determination to go elsewhere. Okay, I'll start with Councillor Eamon and then Councillor Heen. Go ahead, Ted.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. And when I initially read this report, I was I'm leaning towards option 2, not because I'm not committed to the program, John, that we currently have going and the maintenance of that program. I strongly believe that that's important, and I am committed to that. But I also believe that enhancing the pollinator gardens in our community would contribute in the longer term to the climate change issues and environmental issues that we are facing in Orillia and in the province and in the country, and that doing a little bit of that would be useful. And that I appreciate that you're tapped out in finances and tapped out in staff, but it would only be through putting a 10-year program together that we could put into our 10-year plan that council could make the decision whether a greater investment in the economics of materials and staff would be to the benefit of our community. Without that plan, I can't make that decision well. So I looked at option 2 as continuing what we're doing, reinforcing our commitment to pollinator gardens, and at the same time requesting that we put a 10-year plan together to expand that program and bring it to budget where we can consider that in the light of all of the things that we are being challenged with in our long-term plan, of which we've got way more than we can afford. But I'd rather make that decision having the information in front of us rather than make it on a one-off basis. So it was for that reason that I would be willing to move option 2 at this point.
Thank you. I heard part of the conversation before this meeting and somebody else wanted to go in that direction as well. I think that was Pat. Is there a desire to go in a different direction, or is it okay for the chair to put that particular option on the table? Yes, okay. Sorry, Tim, that's a desire to support that or a desire to go in a different direction? Support? Thank you. So I will put that on the screen then, Pat, if it's okay, I'll go to you then, because I think that's also the direction you wanted, and you may want an amendment, as I understand. But what I have right here is that this committee recommends the council that further to the report DSC 2106, which is actually a 06, dated February 11th, 2021, from the Development Services and Engineering Department staff, be directed to complete a review of the city's current parks, trails, recreation centers, parking lots, and other public spaces to identify opportunities to create new and expanded gardens to provide habitat for pollinators, and that based on the review, a budget amount to incrementally build new pollinator gardens and or habitat for each year of the city's 10-year capital forecast be determined and forwarded to the 2022 budget deliberations. And I believe I have a mover in Councillor Eamon. I believe I have a second in Councillor Heen. Is that correct? No? Okay. You got a mover in Councillor Heen and a seconder in Councillor Ainsworth. So it's moved by Ted. Yeah, moved by Ted and seconded by Mason. Okay, now I have Pat, Tim, and then Ralph in queue. Anybody else wish to jump in? Thank you, Mason. You finished your burrito? I just had mine for lunch. Anyway, please, we'll have a go to Councillor Heen. Pat, you're up.
Thank you. Actually, mine was a combination of options 1 and option 2. My thought was that I liked option 1, but I also wanted to add to option 1 the second bullet in from option 2 to establish the additional naturalized areas and the 4 bullets underneath that to create new habitat for bees and butterflies, and that whole section is part of option 1. So mine was a combination of the 2 rather than taking one or the other, but I thought that the combination of the 2 was the way to go.
Mr. McMullen, if you would be so kind as to answer a question for me based on Councillor Heen's query or comment. I interpreted the second paragraph of option 2 where it says build new pollinator gardens and or habitat as taking advantage of or creating naturalized spaces as well. Am I misreading that?
No, that is correct. If we were to do a review of the park system and other public areas, as noted in the staff report, we would be looking for areas that could be naturalized and planted with pollinator supportive species, as well as what we might consider gardens, which would be a sort of a smaller and more heavily maintained efforts at the same. So it's inclusive of both, and certainly if you direct us to look at all of those, then naturalization would be included.
Thank you for that. Pat, are you satisfied with that? Got you, Rob. Thank you.
So what you're saying, John, is that we don't need to have that second part included? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
It is inclusive to a review of the park system, particularly as directed in the motion that was read. So we would be looking at that as well as determining any budget implications. So yes, that would be included as the motion was read.
I am hearing from the clerk's department that the wording in option 2 would capture what you're talking about, Pat. But Ian, would you like to hop in on this? Or you were just low?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Just to add into what John has said, option 2 was not put forward by staff in part for the reason that the workload involved with the detailed evaluation of each of the existing gardens is also going to create a workload that we have limited capacity for this year. John is working basically on his own with a large number of capital projects this year. That's taking a lot of time. This would require some GIS evaluation of each of the gardens, database creation, and additional work just to get the 10-year capital forecast ready for us to go forward. But if that is council's wish, we'll adjust priorities as necessary.
If it is the desire to make that council's wish, I still want it to make sense and be doable. So certainly willing to hear from staff, just as we did there, on the feasibility of doing that. Okay, Pat, do you want to close out your comment? Then I'm going to go to others for commentary.
My thought was that this would be helpful to John. I mean, you've been doing a great job over the last couple of summers, and I love all the gardens that we do have. But when I looked at things such as reducing the number of times that the gardens are mowed, and I was thinking of some of the ones that I know have been problematic, like along Queen Street, where people have been upset that we have mowed the culverts when we have, rather than waiting until after the monarch butterflies, for instance, have finished their nesting or whatever it is they do. That might be helpful as far as you're concerned, if we weren't doing it quite as often or as soon as we were doing them.
John. John, did you wish to?
Yes, certainly. So the roadside management is sort of another aspect of green areas that the city maintains as ditches and otherwise. Some of them are hardened and urbanized and more formal, and some are relatively natural, like Queen Street. It would be a joint effort between our area and operations to really kind of come up with some policies and make sure that staff that conduct that kind of work are aware of timing issues, mowing height. So it's just sort of policies need to be created, and those need to be passed on to the appropriate people to be implemented. Sort of a lot of hands kind of touch mowers and cutting apparatus once we staff up for summers with our students and our full-time people. So it's really a coordination issue, and it requires kind of all hands on deck to pass that information along. So we would just have to spend some time putting together strong procedural information that could be followed so that we're all on the same page. So and that's the aspect that's slightly time consumptive. So would require a bit of prioritization at a staff level, but it doesn't make it impossible.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. Certainly, we understand the challenges that are before the city, and in particular some of the departments at the moment. So I'm glad to hear that. Ted, I do have you in queue, and I've got Tim and then Ralph right now, and then Mason, Rob, and Ted.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. I will be supporting option 2. I think one of the most important aspects of this is education. I really think if we can get citizens thinking in terms of pollinators, that would be a huge step forward. Also, I don't like the idea of just leaving things to the randomness of waiting until we're converting something to do it. I like the idea of a planned, scheduled approach. But I do have 2 questions, actually. I'll ask one, and then I'll wait when you're all done and come back to me. But my first question has to do with stormwater management facilities. I'm assuming that they are considered public space and would be part of this equation. And I do remember when we put in the stormwater management facility out at the corner of Berry Road and University, which is a beautiful place. It's got the gazebo and the trail and all that they planted what I believe were black-eyed Susan or some sort of Rebecca. I'm not sure what it was, but it was just a sea of yellow flowers. Bee Haven, I would believe it would be. And it's sort of faded away. There's other stuff in there, but I remember having a conversation with the horticulturalist who was doing that work, or the landscaper who was doing that work, and saying, well, I was saying this is really nice, and he said, well, yeah, it'll be nice if you take care of it, if you look after it, if you do some work on it. So I'm just wondering, if what kind of work is involved if you want to take a plot of land the size of the stormwater management, stormwater management facility, and keep it pollinating and producing pollinating flowers and being productive that way, as opposed to just letting it go?
It depends on how many naturalized plants you put there. John, do you want to weigh in on that? Councilor Lauer, it strikes me that you and I still have not participated in our Gorilla Flower Fair.
No, it's coming though. This is the year.
Through you, Mayor Clark. So the idea of planting a meadowscape, if you will, or the screensaver we see as the Swiss meadow is a lot more difficult to maintain over the long run. There are practices such as actually mowing at certain heights and the timing of managing it, but it begins with a planting plan, which is including the appropriate plants in the right places, and then managing that. There's also like an aesthetic. I would say that storm management pond that you pointed out, Councillor Lauer is a good example of what happens over time. To manage that and such that it's more reflective of wider diversity of flowers would require going in and spot planting occasionally. It would require managing some of the noxious and invasive plant species that get in. So it's not as simple as just as casting seeds about and then and heading off down the road. It is a more intensive practice. It's again, it would require some sort of procedural updates in terms of how we manage in order to do that. A typical Ontario landscape such as that can be left to naturalize on its own. There's an area in the new Walter Henry Park that we're hoping to do that with. But aesthetically, it's the kind of landscape that, frankly, we get complaints about because of the kind of diversity of plants that go into those areas. So it's almost like an education to understand what naturalization looks like and how it progresses through different stages. So it's both public education in terms of that it's probably not going to look like the Swiss meadow, and then a certain amount of maintenance that you can keep a diversity of flowers healthy in there, and also accept that there's going to be what some would consider to be not as decorative of plants. But I don't know, it's sort of a long-winded answer to something that sounds simple, but has proven in many locations to not be. But storm management ponds are a good example of areas that can be naturalized, often are, and they're great for pollinating insects. They just might not look exactly as you want them to.
Okay, thanks. And just to clarify, there is a strategy. It would cost money. You would have to go in and do some planning if you were wanting to extend whatever aesthetic you had in there. But that's certainly doable.
Yes, and also requiring developers to submit planting plans for stormwater management ponds and to complete the landscaping as part of the development approvals. So we require the work to be done by developers, require professionals to prepare the plans, and then be prepared to put a little bit more of effort into managing the landscape component of those installations over the years.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, but I'll wait till you come back.
I'll circular economy right back to you shortly. Councillor Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. One is I'm wondering now through you to Mr. McMullen, if we can do, whether it's on our website or a separate website through social media, reach out to our citizens, as Councillor Lauer just mentioned, with the type of pollinator gardens that they could plant that will help us and cut down our costs a little bit by providing all these. I know, talked to one of the staff a few years back, and I did the same thing, replanted what I had in my gardens here, and it did attract a lot of butterflies and bees and that kind of stuff. So it is working, and I think the public citizens of Orillia can help us tremendously if we give them the type of plants that they can plant and what actually is a pollinator garden. A lot of people don't understand what it is. So maybe, Mr. McMullen, is it possible for us to put a website in place to do this? It'd be a lot cheaper.
If I could, just one of the questions I have when it's I find myself in queue, John, was very similar. I think the city is capable of doing some wonderful things around this topic because we're the biggest property owner in town, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, in one sector. But except if you look at the private sector, I suppose they far outweigh the city's assets. So my suggestion is a public education campaign could be very beneficial, probably done fairly feasibly financially if it's an education program and we're just giving people the intellectual tools in which to add to our inventory. So and I know you captured that as one of the options in the report, and you talked about the website and social media. So if you could just comment on that public education piece and their potential contribution, but also I would ask staff, because option 2 doesn't really capture that. Would that be taken as direction, or would that have to be an amendment to option 2? I'll start with you, John, please.
Yeah, certainly the public education piece as simply providing the appropriate information, which would be the appropriate plants, which are flowering plants. If they're native, even better. And if they stressing spring flowering plant materials and fall flowering plant materials is the best thing to provide for the pollinating insects. That those gardens are widely dispersed throughout a geographic area, so there's multiple locations. The plants are installed in masses as opposed to singular. So all of that type of information could be provided via the website. We do have the Environmental Advisory Committee and resources such as Sustainable Orillia that may participate in putting a program like that together. So certainly that information could be packaged and put onto a website or social media, etc. The motion, I do not think directly addresses that right now.
Thank you. I'll seek clarification from the clerk's department when we get to that point. Ralph, a quick follow-up. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think the downtown puts flower pots and all that in the downtown area. The BIA could be asked to do if we give them the type of plants that they can plant in those. And I think the city provides the flower pots as well. So maybe that could be an asset for us as well at no cost to us and no extra cost to us. Is that possible, Mr. McMillan?
Educating different organizations, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we have our greenhouses that we grow the material in for those hanging baskets and seasonally installed gardens. And we've got the new greenhouse at the operations yard and the Dr. Seymour Conservancy scheduled to be constructed this year. So we're well involved in that with those flowers and doing those installations, and we could be supporting the BIA in whatever way seems appropriate.
Mr. Mayor, if it needs it.
I'll go to JR in a second. I just want to make a comment. That program that the city provides for the downtown, the core area, is just a stunning, transformational annual event with the flower pots that the staff grow. It's a terrific program. JR, did you wish to weigh in?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Through you, just in addition to what Mr. McMullen provided in terms of communications, as noted in the report, definitely we can do things on our social media, our website, and our existing weekly bulletin with information. Should council want to do something above and beyond in terms of paid advertising or a more robust public education campaign, it would have to be included in some future budget asks in regards to pollinating gardens, but definitely we have the tools available to share the message within our current resources as well.
Great, thank you for that additional information. Mason.
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark, happy to support this moving forward. I think it should just be something that's standard, especially when we're planning our new parks for the future, making sure that, you know, they're in place that create a healthier community, which leads to a lot of other positive benefits. So happy to support this moving forward. And then I just wanted to point out one thing that John said, which I thought was kind of funny, that we actually have a weed policy within the city, which was interesting. So I know there was some talk about that. I think it was a year or two ago now, when there was some cutting down of some different, types of weeds out in the community that are good pollinators. But I'm glad to hear that that is something that's going to be addressed. Thanks so much.
Thank you for that, Mason. Robert.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Clark. Councillor Lauer had asked already my question regarding the stormwater management ponds, and if we could expand on anything moving forward for our developers to kind of go in the direction of a pollinator management pond. My other question was sort of answered as well with our new greenhouse being built down the Dr. Seymour Conservancy, that we do more of a shift to a pollinator plant for that area, and maybe we could do an area in the downtown where we'd have with our hanging basket program to go in the direction of a pollination type of planting material, and have the other side of the street more of a brighter hanging baskets, which we'd certainly do right now. So I think it's a move in the right direction, and certainly I would be supporting option 2 as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rob. Ted?
Thanks, Mayor Clark. My reason for going with option 2 is that I believe that we should be looking at pollinator gardens and other issues of this nature as part of the infrastructure that our city is responsible for providing. And so to do that, I think we need a plan, just like we have a stormwater plan, just like we have a wastewater plan, just like we have a waste disposal plan and a solid waste disposal plan. I saw this as incremental and evolutionary in terms of the budget and its details, where I wouldn't be upset if next year's budget came back and said, well, what we really need is to put this amount of money in to really have the resources to do the kind of detail that is necessary to put this plan together, and that subsequent years really just have a placeholder amount in that gets refined as that plan evolves. Short of our asking for an immediate amount of money for staff to go out and hire a consultant to do a plan, my sense is if we're going to involve it internally, it's going to take some time. But if we don't start this year, we'll be putting it off another year and off another year. So that was where I was going.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Ted. Maybe a couple of comments on that, but I'll go to Tim first for your second question.
Oh, thanks, Mayor Clark. So this is just going a little sideways, John, but in your report, you refer to the fact that the city of Orillia presently does not use pesticides in land management or parks, trails operations, except in extreme situations where a staff licensed professional is required to address poisonous or noxious weeds. So what that did for me was remind me that I've completely lost track of the pesticide regulations in the province of Ontario. It was quite a subject 10, 15 years ago, but where are we now with that exactly? Would it be an option for us to just use pesticides wherever we want, or is it, as I thought it was just simply for identified noxious weeds?
Yes, that's correct. No, I don't. It wouldn't be a situation where we could be the use of pesticides in any extensive manner. They're required to be used only in, like the staff report says, for poisonous and noxious weeds. I believe, in fact, the city of Orillia has only ever used pesticides for quite some time to deal with poison ivy. At this point in time, it's solely been the plant that we have had issues controlling, primarily along the trails system.
But the general sorry, if I could, Mayor Clark, the general regulation it doesn't prohibit a blanket or unchecked pesticide use still. I'm assuming nothing's changed. I didn't miss something. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Okay, great. I just have one comment, then we'll start kind of sew this together. It sounds like council understands the significant benefit of pollinating plants. I mean, aside from aesthetics, they're absolutely vital to our food supply. If you've ever tried to grow products indoor and you were expecting them to fruit or whatever it was, like a strawberry, whatever it happens to be, it just won't happen. They won't happen unless you have pollinating, mostly insects. So you either have to introduce insects into your house or into your hydroponic situation, or manually pollinate, which is also an option. But the presence of pollinating plants is absolutely vital. And to somebody's point earlier, I think it was John's, about some complaints about naturalization or naturalized areas. I hope and I believe there's an awakening in our community and beyond that there is significant benefit to these naturalized areas, even though they may not look completely cultivated sometimes. But I believe there is as I say, an awakening to that kind of thought. So a couple of things I just need some input from staff. It sounds as though option 2 captures Councillor Heen's or Pat's desire to look at naturalized areas as well, because it's providing habitat. And the other 2 points, one was around education. Do we need an amendment to option 2 to ensure education is part of the program? That's number 1. And number 2, around Ted's comment around budget. Now it does refer to a 10-year capital budget in option 2. And I'm not sure if that captures what Ted was going after or not. It sounded like even if there was a contemplation of budget at this year's thing and work began such subsequently, that could be acceptable if there were other restraints. But just a couple of comments, if you wouldn't mind, Madam Deputy Clerk.
Mayor Clark, and through you, I can certainly speak to the amendment aspect that you were inquiring to. I believe that council does act by way of motion. So if there is a desire to direct staff to provide a public education piece, and I did hear in terms of city webpage or a presence on the social media, I do believe it would be advantageous to propose an amendment so that the expectations of staff are clear.
Thank you. That certainly would have been my thought. But speaking of education, I'm willing to be educated if I was wrong. And with respect to budget, does paragraph 2 of option 2 capture the possibility of putting money aside and then having subsequent action, or putting money aside and having action based on that budget even sooner than later? Wait. Oh, okay. So I guess I'll go to Mr. McMullen. John, can you answer that?
I believe, if I understood what Councillor Eamon was referring to, was essentially the idea that of putting together something along the lines of a master gardens and naturalization plan, which could then be implemented in a strategic and incremental kind of way, which we could establish a yearly budget for. So if that were the case and that was how we wanted to move forward, then I get what would be coming to budget would be a request for a certain amount of funding to engage probably a horticultural and landscape architectural team who could prepare a plan like that. And if we were to require that group also provided us with some cost estimation in terms of the implementation of that, then we could move forward, engage the appropriate team of professionals, and I think maybe have a plan that we could act on.
Okay, thank you for that. So if I'm hearing you correctly, paragraph 2 of option 2 captures that, could capture that direction.
Yes, we could move forward.
Your capital. Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you very much. I got Pat, then Ralph. Go ahead, Pat.
I guess the reason I was trying to combine both is I was trying to get the best of both options. And I guess if we're looking at option 2, I wonder about including the public education opportunities from option 1 down into option 2. Councillor Freeman did speak about some parts of public education, and I think that that's a very important part of this whole thing around pollinator gardens, because a lot of people really don't understand what we're talking about when we talk about pollinators gardens. And as John talked about, it's important to have the spring flowers and the fall flowers. And so the public education part I see as being a very important part of this whole process. And I wonder about moving that public education paragraph down into option 2.
Yeah, indeed, that's exactly the reason I asked the question, because I believe the public education piece is pivotal to having this, be a fully meaningful project. So we'll need an amendment of some sort, it appears, to include that education piece. So I've got Ralph, and then I have Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd be happy to move the amendment that Ms. Williams is referring to be included in option 2.
Go ahead, Ted.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Though I moved the motion and it was seconded, I don't believe you read it. And so my motion could be the motion that I could be happy to move, confirm the motion of would include in the first paragraph and other spaces, including public education and so on and so forth, whatever, put an insert in there. There is, by the way, Pat, no reference to public education in the option one. So it's in the commentary, it's not in the motion. So if we want to include it, just insert it in there and then read the motion, which I would be happy to move.
Thanks for that, Ted. Although I will say I did read it, and I did have you as a mover and Mason as a seconder. So we'll probably have to treat it like an amendment. And I believe staff are working on that right now. So we've got a direction. Certainly, as in the chair, I feel satisfied. It's been a wholesome discussion. So I'll let staff pull the amendment together, and then we'll present it for consideration. And here it is here. It's good. Yeah. Just be one moment. Ralph, did you want to speak before I come to that? Go right ahead. You're our entertainment value during this break. Don't let us down.
Sure, I'd be happy to move the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the amendment is proposed is that the motion now before committee be amended by adding the following paragraph, and that staff be directed to undertake public education opportunities identified in option one of the report, including the creation of an information webpage and social media posts on Pollinator Gardens. And just to be clear, that wouldn't omit opportunities like interpretive signs referenced in the report as well. Okay. Okay, and I believe Councillor Ralph is the mover for that. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Thank you, Pat. Any further discussion on the amendment to the main motion? I will now call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Back to the main motion. Would anybody like it reread? I will now call the main motion, which was moved by Ted and seconded by Mason. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Good discussion. If only those little bees and hummingbirds knew they were so well thought of. And moths. All right. Okay, we're into departmental reports. Relatively lengthy report and presentation with respect to our corporate services department regarding electronic content management review and business process optimization. And I see Liz Reed. Ms. Reed, the floor is all yours to introduce this report. Welcome to the virtual hood.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Through you, in 2020, the city successfully applied for a $150,000 grant from the Municipal Modernization Program to have an independent consultant review 28 external-facing business processes to identify modernization and improvement opportunities and to recommend strategic technology systems, including the replacement of the outdated SIRE records management system. Under the terms of the grant, the city must publish a public report by March 1st, 2021. The staff report is meant to ensure council is well informed of the project and the recommended strategic direction. In applying for the grant, the city recognized that there are always opportunities for continuous improvement and that an independent third-party review would help to confirm whether the city was making wise technology decisions and provide recommendations on future technology investments. In May 2020, the city engaged the Perry Group through a competitive RFP process to identify and recommend records management policy and procedural updates and determine whether the city investment in Microsoft 365 could be leveraged as a replacement for the SIRE document management system, and to review and optimize 28 external-facing business processes, including utility locates, road occupancy permits, building permits, parking fines and enforcement, animal licensing, and tax certificates. The consultants worked with 40 city staff for more than 4 months in over 60 workshops. The 60 workshops provided city staff with the time and the opportunity to examine the detailed processes and identify potential improvements. Based on these collaborative workshops, the description of business processes, and the input received from city staff, the Perry Group identified that while the city is making positive progress, there are opportunities and investments that would further streamline and automate processes and improve the customer experience, reduce paper, and increase efficiencies. With that, I will introduce Ben Perry, the CEO of the Perry Consulting Group, who will present the findings within the report. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Liz. Thank you for that. And as identified in the report, the Perry Consulting Limited Group put the report together, and I see Ben Perry is with us, CEO of said company. Welcome to the Sunshine City, Ben, although I'm guessing you're not really here physically. But anyway, if you want to do your presentation, please do.
All right, that's great. Thanks very much for the introduction. If we could move to the next slide, just a little bit of background about us. We're a company that focuses only on municipalities. And over the last decade, we've worked with about 120 municipalities across Canada. We focus on technology and digital, business process optimization and service reviews. You can see some of the clients that we've worked with there. All of our consultants are former municipal IT leaders, so CIOs, general managers, directors, from places such as Guelph, Oakville, Newmarket, Brampton, and Toronto. And we're passionate about technology because we've seen firsthand how technology delivered efficiencies and productivity for staff and improved customer experiences. If we go to the next slide, please. The project, as Liz introduced, worked on 2 specific work streams. A process optimization exercise where we facilitated process reviews. So as Liz said, lots of participation from staff. And then the second part to assess whether Microsoft 365 product that you already use could be used for your replacement for SIRE. Next slide, please. Whenever we're doing this type of service review work, we think it's really important to think about the context in which services are delivered today. We've moved into an internet and smartphone era. 92% of Ontarians have access to the internet at home. 88% of Canadians bank online, 76% have smartphones, and 71% of seniors are using the internet, and that's the fastest growing segment. COVID has obviously had a huge impact on service delivery and service industries. You only have to think about all of the various different service industries: finance, media, entertainment, travel, retail, exercise, education, even, and health, to see how much things have changed. And then, we think that you look at Service Ontario, renewing your own health card or your driver's license online, getting your vehicle sticker or your hunting license, getting a passport or filing taxes. These are the service experiences that your customers of the city of Orillia, are used to, and they're increasingly expecting their city government to provide services in the same way. We think this is becoming the new normal. So it's in this context, if we go to the next slide, please, that we worked with the city. We selected the 28 processes, and then we ran through a process where we facilitated process reviews. So this process involved us running workshops with staff who are delivering the service, frontline service staff who are delivering the service today, and making sure that we understand what the business process is today, identifying improvement opportunities, documenting those things and validating that with staff and management. And then workshops with staff to design and optimize processes that takes advantage of digital capabilities, 2B methods, and then us documenting, validating, and reviewing. So as Liz mentioned, staff were really engaged, very excited, and most of the ideas that we discussed in those workshops came from staff, not from the consulting team. On the next page, we summarized some of the things that we saw. And as Liz pointed out, much of this was expected. We completed most of our discovery work during May and June of last year. So we know that some of these processes will have changed already. But as we expected and as anticipated by your team, some of the city services don't quite match up to the modern service experiences that we talked about. Many of the processes are designed for over-the-counter interactions for customers to come in, sometimes multiple times, are primarily paper-based, don't use technology as much as they could. Field workers might have devices, but they're not using that technology to connect to the systems that are used in the back office to manage processes. And so we're often relying on paper. If the city wants to achieve meeting the expectations or the growing expectations, then changes are going to be necessary. So almost every process that we reviewed, we identified some extent of streamlining from 5 minutes per transaction to up to 1 hour and 3/4 per transaction. Most of the service improvements come from reducing the prevalence of paper, using systems to manage workflows, reducing sort of transposition of content. Sorry, I've moved on to the next slide at this point. So, our research and lots of research shows that the average cost per transaction in Canadian for governments to deliver face-to-face transactions is between $12 and $30. Phone call is maybe around $6, up to $10. And a web transaction is about $1 or less. So moving services online represents good business sense and best value for taxpayers. So of the 28 that we reviewed, a number rose to the top in terms of where significant improvements could be achieved. So of the 28, we identified the top 9 where we recommend the city should target. Obviously, implementation of those optimized processes has the potential to achieve future cost avoidances, could reduce paper use, increase convenience for customers, reduce the need for customer trips to City Hall, and carbon emissions as a result. So there's a whole series of opportunities that we can see. Next slide, please. The second stream of work was focusing on the ECM side of things, the city's records, document, and collaboration management system, where it keeps its files. Our review confirmed that SIRE, the current system implemented in 2007, is no longer supported by the vendor, and that's a risk to the city. And it really isn't suited to modern collaboration needs or effective document and records management practices. So we worked with the teams from all of the business units and experts in records management in clerks and NIT, and we developed a set of requirements that the city has, and we assessed those against Microsoft 365. Our assessment confirms that the product that you've already invested in terms of your emailing and calendaring and various other features would meet your requirements and would bring significant collaboration improvements. We'd also caution, though, that there's some work needed before you get into the technology side around policy and processes. Records management manual needs to be updated and policies need to be updated. And we've provided the team with a set of recommendations around that. We'd also note that this is a fairly challenging project to be successful. We've worked with a number of large municipalities that have had some challenges implementing this, so we have to be careful. There's ways that we can reduce risk by dedicating sufficient resources to the project, breaking the project into smaller parts, but it's an important project, but one that takes some institutional effort. Next slide, please. We think, and we have identified a number of quick wins, and the team's already jumped all over those quick wins. So you'll see a number of these things are already allocated funding in 2021. So continued investment is going to deliver some improvements. But if we move to the next slide, from a technology investment perspective, we think there are some really important strategic priorities that the city should focus its effort in. And these three investments will provide the foundation for and address a number of the process improvements identified through the BPO work. So, for example, you're implementing citywide for asset management currently, and by expanding the scope to focus on work management, you'll be able to deal with numerous processes, including locates, work management, work assignments, service requests, inspections, and field data collection, or a planning, permitting, and licensing system, which will cover processes related to development approvals, to building permitting and the inspections process, to licensing, bylaw, and others. As well as building a single property reference that you can find out all of the things that are going on at a single property, which today is quite challenging to do. So by making some targeted investments, improvements in numerous service areas can be achieved. So if we go to the next slide, please, my last slide. We think we've identified a number of opportunities on the table. And to be most impactful, we think the city should focus on a handful of these significant strategic initiatives. And those create the foundations that will support the city on a going forward basis in efficient service delivery. And, we need to make sure that those strategic investments are successful. So we do that by making sure that they have the right resources, the right support to be successful. So that's my summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Perry. Indeed. And as you suggested, I will now open the floor for questions, comments, discussion from member council. Go ahead, Pat. And then Tim. Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you. I can really see the benefits of an awful lot of what you're saying. One of my kids is involved in ITs, and I think I'm his worst nightmare. I know I'm the worst nightmare for our IT department as I go in on a regular basis saying, please fix what I've managed to break. And although that I know that most of the different departments that you've identified would be mostly professionals that would be accessing them, I also know that there'd be the common citizen, the average citizen like myself that would probably be accessing some of the things. For instance, if they were doing a renovation on their house or getting an animal license. And I'm also aware that a lot of seniors, for instance, are not necessarily computer savvy. Councillor Fallis, for instance, has a great program right now where people that are not comfortable going on the internet, he has a phone-in program where they read the news to them, because not everybody is comfortable or has a computer. So my question is, will there still be the ability for people to go in pick up a dog license or get a certificate or a building license to renovate their property? Does it always have to be done online? Because we have to remember that not everybody is computer savvy.
Thank you for that, Pat. Mr. Perry, notwithstanding the point you made earlier that the senior sector is our fastest growing sector, I think using these type of technologies probably started from a low use vantage point, mind you, or situation. Can you please comment on Councillor Heem's question?
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly not something that any municipality is looking to be exclusionary. These are added channels that deliver service to people that want to use them. The phrase that we often use is omni-channel. So, Sears used to say click, call, or come in. And although that probably is a bit of a bad person to reference, I think the idea applies. The service is available, should be made available to customers how they want to interact with you. And nobody should be left high and dry. So that doesn't mean that you will only be able to buy an animal license online. It does mean that we should offer a great service online that makes it easy for customers to use in the middle of the night or from their smartphone while they're in a hockey arena or whatever it might be. But any customer that wants to call or come in to do that transaction should be supported 100%.
Thanks for that response, Mr. Perry. Now, follow-up?
Yeah, my follow-up question is, for instance, on a dog license, if it's a one-time thing, how do you get the dog tag, or will they still be using dog tags? How does that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's I think this is very similar to Service Ontario, where you go online to renew your sticker on your vehicle, or if you renew your health card, you complete the transaction online, but you're sent in the mail the item.
Thank you. I believe I have Councillor, well, we're staying informal today, Tim.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. I've got several questions, but I'll just ask one, and if you can put me back in queue after everybody else has gone through. My first question has to do with Microsoft 365. I'm wondering, have you done an evaluation on how long it's going to be relevant, what kind of timeline you can expect to get service out of that, or good service out of it? And the reason I'm asking that is I have a history of buying things that are supposedly the latest and greatest, and then discovering very quickly that they were actually patented 3 or 4 years ago, and that in another year I'll be looking at envy at the newest best thing. So I'm just wondering if part of the process was an evaluation of how long this particular program may be relevant.
Yeah, good question, Tim. So this is newer technology, I would suggest. Microsoft is moving away from what they call on-premise software, or sort of locally loaded software, moving to the cloud. And so they're sort of widely being adopted right now by a huge majority, I would say, of municipalities at this point. So this is a very, I would say, not unusual strategy. You're sort of very much in the pack, as it were. Yeah, so we're moving to some enterprise software that is very broadly used across the globe, the life cycle on that is very long. But in actual fact, you're sort of moving to a product that is constantly updated by Microsoft. So what you're actually moving to is a subscription to the service. So you're constantly getting the newest version of that software.
Thank you. Great. Thank you for that. And Tim, I've got you back in queue. I'll go to Ralph, then Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If this question is out of not conducive to this report, please tell me so. But I think Mr. Perry is probably the proper person to answer this. Toronto, the City of Toronto has just announced that they're going to introduce public internet plant network. And what Councillor Heehan has said, and it's absolutely true, but the problem is that a lot of the seniors, a lot of people in Orillia can't afford the $90, $100, $150 internet usage or internet sign up. I'm wondering if it's coming where cities plan to introduce being an internet supplier to our community. And I have one other question after that, Mr. Mayor, after Councillor Lauer.
I'm not sure if this is your bailiwick or not, but if you, I see a nod ahead, so please weigh in.
It is. So, yeah, I think COVID has really highlighted how important internet connectivity is. A number of communities, during COVID set up Wi-Fi hotspots in community parking lots and these types of things to help people get access. Town of Innisfil, we've just been working with the Town of Innisfil on a broadband strategy, helping them figure out how they are going to stimulate demand in the community. And so they're evaluating a series of options. Haldeman County, we've just finished some work with them, and they've actually working with the private sector, borrowing some money and loaning some money to the private sector to incentivize the build out of infrastructure to provide connectivity to thousands of community members that are currently underserved. So there is a tremendous amount of provincial and federal government grants and funding circulating at this time. So it is certainly something that municipalities are wading into.
Yeah.
So if I could just expand on Councillor Sepulveda's question, because I think part of the issue is affordability, and I think that's why Toronto went to their thing. It was one thing we got blessed with in Orillia is a very good connectivity and broadband capabilities, and it's getting even better this year. But the affordability aspect in particular, or was that addressed in some of your comments about grants, et cetera, being available?
Well, affordability for sure is a digital divide question. I think there's broader conversation about, competition with the marketplace, from a government perspective. I think there are places that are looking at availability primarily rather than market competitiveness. But I would suggest if there's something that council is interested in exploring, then, there's some work to do to study those options.
Thank you for that. I now have Ted. Thank you. Go ahead, Ted.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. It is totally appropriate that for the very first time in my participation in these virtual meetings, my internet actually completely died, Mr. Perry, during your presentation, so I did not hear any of it. And Mayor Clark, have we a motion on the floor because I joined after the discussion started, or are we still in questioning Mr. Perry?
So it really was a presentation from Liz and then from Mr. Perry, and we haven't yet put the motion on the floor, but I believe it is to receive the information, but go ahead.
Then if I may, I will go ahead with a more of a comment. Well, I suppose it is a question. Let me set the stage by saying, Mr. Perry, in my life, I have been involved in two major BPO introductions. One was a PeopleSoft introduction with Alberta Health Services, and the other was a Cerner implementation with our own hospital here in Orillia for electronic medical records. And in both cases, your report really resonated for me in terms of the amount of investment that is required, both in terms of staff, technology, time, and particularly the amount of investment in change management that occurs. So I'm assuming that Microsoft Suite 65 would be comparable to in my earlier experiences to PeopleSoft and Cerner, that it's a platform that can be used. And I've known in those circumstances, the amount of energy and effort that those organizations had to spend, and I think your estimates were multi-million-dollar for the city over the long term. Where I was, and I'm seeing you nodding, so I'm assuming that you're confirming that I am online here. So then where I was wanting to go with this, Mayor Clark, is to suggest that I appreciate the report very much. I found it very interesting reading. Actually, I read the whole thing in detail, and I also am very much aware that we are making incremental progress along the way to this. But as with the previous discussion, I would feel much more comfortable if we were to come forward with our 5 to 10 year plan to implement this process, so that we at the council table would have an opportunity to consider the priority of this need in our city, this internal infrastructure, service infrastructure, and could begin to budget the costs on a planned basis over a period of time. Probably, I think, Mr. Perry, if I was mistaken, you were looking at something around 7 years, but I would expect we're probably looking more, since we plan on a 10-year cycle, that would be that way. And so my point was to say not only to receive this report, but to also ask staff to prepare for our next budget cycle a 10-year plan to move us forward to do this, because I am aware that it's not going to happen. We can't afford it out of our current operating budget for IT. It's going to require capital and additional effort to make this happen, notwithstanding that we've been investing in the past couple of years this year. So that would be my point.
Mr. Perry, I don't know if you have a comment on that or not. If you do, please weigh in. If you do, and then or even if you don't, at some point I'll go to Amanpreet Singh Sidhu, who this is in his department. Go ahead.
So yeah, I think Councillor is correct. This is not a strategic plan. This is a reaction to the opportunities that we've identified. And there could well be numerous other opportunities that we haven't considered, because we only focused on 28 business processes. We do think that it would, I think we make the recommendation that you should develop a strategy and, do some prioritization around that work. And that those recommendations should come through the budget process so that you can evaluate them and set the priorities organizationally. So yeah, I would agree with what you've said. And just back to your PeopleSoft and Cerner experience, there is. You invest to save in the long term. You invest for benefits in the long term. And that's what we're really talking about, investing in platforms that can power various parts of the organization. So very much in line with your experience in healthcare.
Those are good points you made now and in the report. You need to invest to realize these savings down the road. And not only that, but to improve customer service, of course. Amanpreet, if you would like to weigh in on Councillor Eamon's question or comment around strategy, please.
Thank you, sir, and through you, Mayor Clark. Excellent suggestion as always from Councillor Eamon. We will certainly look to what is possible. And as Ben noted, and during Ms. Reed's presentation, what we're looking at is more of a corporate technology plan, corporate technology strategic plan for 10 years, not really an IT plan. And we would be happy to come back to council with the request because it's that sort of planning is beyond the capabilities of our IT staff, and we will certainly need to bring in external expertise to help with that. We will include that in our request for the next year budget. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Amanpreet. Any further questions or comments? Ralph, go ahead. Then I'm going to ask that the motion be put on the floor with, unless there's a desire not to go in that direction, with request to staff to formulate a plan. So go ahead, Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, you have other questions to Q2. Go ahead, Ralph.
To Mr. Perry, security-wise, we've all had malware and viruses and ransomware. Some municipalities just west of us had ransomware and all their records and everything else, and they required money. They had to pay substantial amount of money. Will the security of this system that you're talking about be included in what we're trying to do here? Because I think it's so important, and people will have confidence that the city of Orillia has security for them to go on the internet and do their dog tags and so on. That is a real big concern within the community.
The question of hacking and ransom.
Yeah, so it's another really important question. I think that actually points to the importance of the IT strategy. The strategy this piece of work didn't evaluate your security posture or your capabilities, and that's something that you should do on a regular basis. Online services, the introduction of online services absolutely need to meet security standards, and there are a set of security standards that you can adopt and apply and assess vendors and providers against, and we've certainly helped municipalities prepare those types of security evaluations and checklists. The types of solutions that we're talking about are tested in municipal, but also in industry. So the Office 365 piece that we're talking about, again, is the crown, I'm going to say the crown jewels for a company like Microsoft. And they have hundreds, if not thousands of people working on securing that infrastructure compared to the 4 or 5 people that currently work in Orillia's IT department. I think you can get the sense of where I'm going there. I think you're likely to actually be more secure in some of those platforms than you would be managing that infrastructure in-house. So that's a key part. The broader point, the sort of Woodstocks and other people that you, Wasagas that you've mentioned, there's some work to be done for sure. I know Liz has got some things in hand, but you need a security plan to protect your assets and protect the information that you're managing on behalf of your citizens.
A quick follow-up, Ralph, go right ahead.
So the initiative of the strategic initiatives that you're doing, I don't see any security plan for it. Will we have a security plan if we adopt this?
I think I would defer this to Amanpreet or to Liz to answer that question. That is a part of the delivery of these types of projects. As you purchase solutions, then you should be assessing those solutions that they're meeting security standards. And so, I think you're procuring systems that meet your security standards. So that's, ultimately those solutions will meet those requirements.
I sense this as Mr. Perry is quite aware of the need that you speak of, Ralph, but I don't think this is a service they particularly provide. Certainly it's a process that would have to go on in tandem and parallel with anything that we implement. But Liz, if you want to comment, that'd be great.
Certainly. So as council knows, you did approve an IT security and infrastructure analyst last year, and he is very busy working towards documenting security standards. Certainly, we are implementing products that have those modern security standards within them. Microsoft 365 is one, and the implementation of that, we have been doing to specific standards. But there is always room, of course, to improve security, and there are always impending threats. But we have concentrated in that area, and we do still work towards ensuring that any services, including online services, are secure, or as secure as they can be.
Great, thank you for that, Liz. Okay, Tim. Okay, I have Tim and Pat. So I want to start, and David, I want to start winding this conversation down. David has not spoken. But are the three of you okay if I put the proposed resolution on the screen, or do you wish to speak and potentially change direction? We're okay. So I will ask staff to put that up there with the desire that we have staff come back and report on the financial plan as well. Thank you. You guys are fast. All right, that this committee recommends to council that the report CSLD 2103 dated February 2nd, 2021 from the Corporate Services Department regarding the final report from the Perry Group Consulting Limited on the electronic content management review and business process optimization project be received. And further, and that the staff be directed to prepare a 10-year implementation plan and a respective budget for consideration during the 2022 budget deliberations. Now I have Tim and Ralph and Pat. Go ahead, Tim. Oh, sorry. Is there a mover and a second to put this on the floor? Okay, I guess the motion dies. Okay, thank you, Ted, and thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Mayor Clark.
You don't want to move it, Tim? Ted?
No, Mayor.
A second to put this
Once
on the floor,
again,
please.
I'm questioning whether the motion meets the intent that I had originally suggested we put forward. So I, until it's clarified, I'm not willing to move it. But
Okay, that's fine. So let's do that now before it's officially on the floor. Let's put it back up on the screen, if you would, please, Madam Deputy Clerk. And then Councilor Iman, you can take a moment to review it.
Mayor Clark, my point would be that I heard the General Manager of Community Services say that it would require a budget consideration next year to build to retain a resource to develop a 10-year plan. This says we're going to develop a 10-year plan and present it to budget. I also heard that we don't have the capacity to do that. So in that sense, this motion does not deal with the lack of resource that the city has to prepare the kind of plan that I was contemplating, which was the broader plan, not just the direct implementation. But if what this is saying is that the first year of that plan will be to retain the resources to build out the remaining 9 years, then I'm comfortable.
Thank you, Ted. I know you well enough to believe that you understood Councilor Eamon's comment, and I would like to.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. And through you, I can confirm that direction has been taken and understood.
Then I'd be pleased to move.
Okay, then I'll turn to our clerk's department because I'm not sure if this, maybe I'll get the clerk staff comment whether this resolution captures Councillor Eamon's. It doesn't. Okay, so therefore, I'm going to, Madam CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, and just if I can, through you to Amanpreet, as it is written right now, it is suggesting that staff take on that role of the development of the 10-year implementation plan. And so I believe if we are intending to have someone brought in to assist with the development of that plan, that would be a capital budget submission for 2022. And so if I can just seek clarification again through you, Mr. Mayor, to Amanpreet in terms of that direction so that we can ensure that the motion is in fact accurate.
Amanpreet?
Mayor Clark, I believe that the clarification that we can add is that staff be directed to initiate steps to prepare a 10-year implementation plan.
Well, that sounds fairly all-inclusive and allow that strategy to move forward. Councillor Freeman, does that satisfy your desire? Yes, thank you very much.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
that clarification does satisfy. Thank you, Mayor Clark. And I would be happy to move the motion and look forward to our budget deliberation next year and supporting the funding required.
Great, thank you. And I'll have staff make that change before this resolution is formally on the floor. Initiate steps. Okay, there is the proposed resolution with the suggested change. The part that's relevant to this conversation is staff be directed to initiate steps to prepare a 10-year implementation plan. What I understood, that captures the spirit of the conversation. So therefore, Ted, I believe you are the mover for this. You're the mover, or is there a shaker? Seconder, thank you, Pat. Anybody like it reread? Any further questions, comments, discussion? Oh, sorry, I did have, David and Pat. I'm going to go with that order because David hasn't spoken yet. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. First of all, great report. I read it with great interest, as I'm sure everyone expected. I love the fact that you involved staff in the process right from the get-go. I mean, obviously, they're the ones that know the processes, and they're the ones that ultimately will be using the solutions that are implemented. I also love the fact that there is the reference to the reduction of CO2 emissions and the reduction of paper by implementing the online services. That's fantastic. The thing that I found a little perhaps curious is, I mean, you want to have solutions that you don't have to input information in different systems. They all talk, they all communicate. And my understanding is generally what municipalities do is kind of base their systems around the financial system. You put that core in place and then you branch out from there, because within that core is, the property, the roll number, and then anything that happens, dog licenses, building permits, are tied back to that through the financial system. And in this report, it doesn't really speak to that. It kind of just leaves Great Plains over there by itself, and you almost will deal with that later. But so I think you know where I'm going here, Mr. Perry, is just, so with Microsoft 365 being the records management piece, and the other Central Square, the other pieces that you refer to, I'm always concerned when you have all these different systems talking to one another, that when you get an update to one and it breaks the communication, then you have one company blaming the other and no one taking responsibility and no one fixing that connection. And I'm just worried about all the connections that are being suggested here. Could you just speak to that a little bit, please?
Mr. Perry, if you could just speak to the connectivity glue that David's referenced, please.
Yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right that what we call people and money are the central sort of piece of the technology puzzle. On this project, we were only looking at external business processes. So we didn't look at any of the internal business processes. And I know that staff are already doing that. So that's probably one of the reasons why there's not a lot of conversation about that within the report. The second point is that there is no one solution out there that does a great job for all of the parts of the different, the different services that a municipality offers. Even though the people and money system providers will tell you that they can do it all, it tends not to be very good for the actual business departments that actually need to use them. So integration, interfaces, passing information between systems is really critical. So if we're going to use the finance system, Great Plains, to store information, We need it to link to our document management systems so that receipts, invoices, and various things are attached and linked together. You're right that there are some risks associated with that model, but modern integration is improving, and I think the industry is beginning to realize the importance of interoperability, and that you can't bring everything into one spot. So the reality of almost every municipality that we work with is, and even the best municipalities that we work with, places like Oakville, for instance, have 6 or 7 core systems that run the vast majority of their business. And those systems are integrated, or so we either use integration or data warehousing to pull data out of various different systems and to match them together. I think you're absolutely right. It's a key point. And actually, one of the things that we're suggesting in the report here is that we need the IT team to be more involved in business solutions so that we can design those types of integrations, right? And make sure that those systems are interoperable. So I would say it's a great point. Something that we are really sort of trying to bear in mind is something that Liz and I have spent a lot of time actually talking about through this project.
Thank you both for that follow-up, David.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And you're right. It's so surprising that there isn't that all-in-one solution. There are so many municipalities with processes that are so similar. You would think there would be that one solution that does everything, and it, as you said, it just doesn't seem to exist. So you end up with these, with these different systems trying to interface with one another, as you said. So anyway, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we modify the resolution to direct Councillor Campbell to come up with such a beast. Okay, I have read this. I have Pat, sorry, you want the final word here. This is going to bring it home. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on Liz's comments about the security measures that they had in place. And I think that's really important. I think that people understand that those security measures are in place. I'm very comfortable doing online banking, but as an example, but I did have constituents reach out to me because they weren't comfortable even registering for Parks and Rec programs online because they didn't want to put their visa information online. So not everybody has that comfort level. And so to hear Liz talk about the security measures that are in place, I think is important. And I think that people really need to realize that those security measures are in place. So thank you, Liz, for those comments.
What's that show, Silent Bob? And the Silent David's not so silent. David,
sorry, Matt Clark. I know that was the last comment to Councillor Heen there, and I apologize. I just wanted to say the City of Orillia has a phenomenal IT team. They really do. A great group who have done a phenomenal job, particularly with everything that's been put on their shoulders over the last year. And if you look at what we're talking about here, their workload is going to increase dramatically trying to implement all these systems. And I think everyone needs to be aware of that. And I know we all appreciate what they do, for sure.
Good comment, and probably very accurate. Okay, seeing no other hands in the air, I have a mover and a seconder and Pat. You've seen the resolution and I've read it. Any further questions, comments? I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, on to our second departmental report with respect to corporate services regarding 34 Market Street. And I'm going to guess by the mere presence of Ms. Telford that you may be the one to introduce this particular report.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Clark. The property owner of 34 Market Street requests consideration for a development charge late payment agreement to assist with the payment of various fees associated with finalizing past building permit files for the addition and conversion of 6 previously developed residential units. While the municipal portion of the development charges could qualify for a late payment agreement under the city's bylaw and provincial legislation, the education development charges, building permit fees, and parkland dedication fees incurred are due at the time the 2021 building permit is issued. We would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Telford. And unless there's a desire to go in a different direction, I'd like to put the resolution on the screen. Okay, I will put it on the screen then, please. Then I'll go to Pat. And this committee recommends the council that is recommended report CSLD 2105 dated February 16th, 2021 from the Corporate Services Department, Mayor and Clerk be authorized to execute a development charges late payment agreement with Market West Inc. for a 2-year period in the amount of $39,926, representing the total outstanding municipal development charges for 34 Market Street, and that an annual interest rate of prime plus 2% per annum be applied to the outstanding fees set out in the policy 4.3.1.3 development charge interest rate policy. Is there a mover and a seconder to put that on the floor? Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Pat. And Pat, you go right ahead. You want to start the conversation.
Thank you very much, Mayor Clark. My question is, because I don't know the answer, is it possible for the this landowner to apply to the school board to have the same sort of consideration given for the educational taxes? Or does they have to pay it all at once?
Through you, Mayor Clark. I did check the Education DC Act also says that they're due at the time of the building permit. We've never had any other situation. It's always just been that rule.
So that if that is a possibility, Pat, it's certainly not in the municipality's bailiwick, and we're not aware of that. Other questions, comments? Okay, I will now call the question. All in favor? Thank you very much. Must have been one heck of a succinct report, Ms. Telford. And now on to, I believe, our longest report of the day. With respect to, coincidentally enough, or ironically enough, not sure which term applies, the City of Orillia Emergency Response Plan Bylaw. And now there is a face that I have spent a lot of time with in the last year, virtually. Chief Thomas, welcome to the hood. And if you want to introduce your report, please do.
Thank you, Mayor Clark, and through you to the members of council. I am recommending that Schedule A of our emergency response plan be replaced in Chapter 385 of the Municipal Code as per the briefing that you have. A little bit of background, the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act required that our emergency response plan be adopted by bylaw in 2012, and that was done once as per the requirement at that time. A new Chief of Emergency Management updated our yearly requirements in 2020 to include adopting our emergency response plan, which is our Schedule A, yearly into bylaw starting last year. This requirement was brought into place immediately prior to the pandemic starting and being declared in the province and in the City of Orillia. A little bit of background, yearly we are required to submit extensive documentation to the Ontario Fire Marshal and Emergency Management to show that we are compliant to the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, and to be able to effectively deal with emergencies in or around our community. This documentation is typically submitted throughout the last half of the year, but due to our own emergency declaration, it was started in December and completed soon after, before the end of the year. I did submit our emergency response plan as is published in the briefing. as part of our yearly documentation in December. And I spoke to our field officer at OFMEM at length about this, as well as a couple other documents that needed to be submitted in 2020 due to the pandemic and Orillia's emergency declaration, because they were in effect becoming a working document. Our field officer agreed that Orillia, like many municipalities, were working within their emergency response plan, but have made adjustments to deal with the worldwide pandemic that were never anticipated in our plan, nor was it part of our plan or just about every other municipality in the province. The adjustments we are currently working with are only briefly addressed in our plan for a long-term emergency, including the need to do most of our work electronically, as opposed to activation and round-the-clock staffing of our emergency operations center as we would typically do. The OFMEM understands that while we are following our emergency response plan as approved, Orillia, like most cities, have not had the time with staff time or the opportunity to complete a detailed update of their emergency response plan, simply because we are dealing with the emergency within our municipalities and supporting public health in the province of Ontario. They do understand that we will do a complete update of our emergency response plans when we have the time, and we can debrief and present to council what changes need to be done once the pandemic is declared over. Orillia's emergency response plan, while working well, does need some updating around our staff position titles and enhancing some of the measures that we would need or anticipate in the future. However, to be compliant with the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, we submitted the current Schedule A as in your package in December, and that is the version that is required to be adopted in Chapter 385 as per the recent request of the Chief of Emergency Management. This Schedule A will be edited as soon as our staff have time to debrief our much anticipated termination of the emergency and the final alignment of staff when all vacancies are filled. For example, the General Manager of Community Services currently in process, and their staff reallocated will mean that our plan will again change. In the interim, the OFMEM was satisfied with our emergency response plan. I, in addition, provided them with our organization chart as of December, and that was acceptable as an additional information for their purposes to provide yearly compliance. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for that, Chief. And if okay, I'll put the proposed resolution on the screen, and then I'll go to Pat, and then I'll go to Tim. Schedule, not appendix. This committee recommends the council that is recommended in report HR 21-2 dated February 16th, 2021 from the Fire Department, Schedule A of Chapter 385 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code Emergency Response Plan be repealed and replaced as set out in Schedule A of the report. And I'll go to Pat, and then I will go to Tim. Oh, sorry, a mover and a second to put those on the floor formally. Thank you, David. Thank you, Ted. And now I'll go to Pat and Tim.
Thank you. The first time I read the City of Orillia Emergency Response Plan was back in 1999 when we were getting ready for Y2K. And at that time, when I read it, they had one of the service clubs as being one of the prime people to be able to help in one of the emergencies. So I phoned the head of Parks and Rec at the time and said, so why wouldn't you have victim services as part of the emergency response team? And they said, well, why would we? And so I went into a long explanation of all the training that victim service volunteers had and how during Y2K, we were quite willing to have them all on standby, and none of them would have anything to drink. And I was quite sure that the service club probably would be out having a good time celebrating Y2K and probably would have a fair amount to drink. And finally, they agreed that maybe victim services were the people to have on standby. And I was so delighted to, when I was reading the emergency plan this time around, Brent, to see that victim services actually had their own little slot and are included as part of the emergency plan, because I know how hard they've worked to get to be part of it. and they really can do a lot to help in any kind of an emergency. So I've read a lot of them over the years. So thank you for I know the amount of work that goes into it, and thank you for all the work that you've done to get them that far.
Thank you very much for that, Pat. I'll go to Tim and then Jay.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. And thanks, Brent, for the report. Speaking of not seeing faces, I doubt you've seen your wife lately. She did a wonderful, wonderful job again this
I saw her last week. Now,
oh, did you? There was a Lynn sighting, was there? Anyway, congratulations to her. My question, I'm not sure my question pertains to this report, but I've always had a concern about council's training in emergencies. Now, this pandemic is a bit of a different beast in that communications and infrastructure were, remained in place, and we were quite able to get together and do what we have to do. But in the case of something like an ice storm or electrical hacking or something where communications were down, I'm thinking that I've always thought that it would be a great idea that council receive some sort of training in exactly what was expected of them and so on and so forth. And actually, my concern goes back to what was a bit of an emergency, which was the power outages back in 2005, 2006, thereabouts. 2003, was it that far back? 2003, okay, thanks. I was just so distraught at the time. I didn't pay attention to what year it was. But the counselors of the day, I was one of them, were receiving all kinds of calls from the public, asking what's going on. And of course, there was no communications. It was hard to get information to the counselors even. So they will be relied on in those situations for information, even if it's your next door neighbor knocking on the door and things like that. And as we know from Brent's courses, there are things to say and things not to say, and information to give and information not to give. So I'm just wondering, is this a report that would speak to that, or is that another policy?
Brent, if you wish to address Tim's question, that'd be great.
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. Absolutely. We actually did have training scheduled to do with council. I know the CAO and I had spoken at length about it. And I actually had a course planned with the assistance of the County of Simcoe's emergency management staff, and ironically, Simcoe Muskoka Health Unit's emergency management division, to do a presentation and a training session with council. And then we had COVID that came upon us. So absolutely, we have the framework and what was the original draft, I'll call it now, of a training session for the members of council. Which I am quite confident will be edited based on what we've gone through in the last year to present to council once we can declare this emergency over. So I agree with you, and this is something that we're about ready to do, and we will do this at the next available appropriate time.
Okay, so it's nothing that we have to add to this.
Sorry, that's correct. Through you, Mr. Mayor. This would be additional training as part of the yearly compliance. Training of members of council is not part of the actual Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, but it is part of what we do as the Emergency Management Committee and the Emergency Control Group. So we will make sure that happens.
Thank you for that, Tim and Chief. I certainly did a 2-day course at which I believe you were a significant presenter at a few years ago. Now, it certainly was very helpful. And even though this, the pandemic isn't an ice storm or a power outage or a flood or a hurricane or tornado, there was some very relevant information, even though instead of a week-long emergency, it's a year and a half and a week long, I think. In this case, anyway, I believe I have Jay in queue and then Pat. So go ahead, Jay.
Thanks, Steve. Through the chair, I was reading through the report and I was just kind of interested, Brent. You mentioned under the support groups, the group Orillia Amateur Radio Club representative, and I was really interested by that. I was curious, is that a standard person to have in an emergency group like this for a city's plan, or is that unique to Orillia? And just if you can provide a bit of detail in terms of what their role is, yeah, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. Chief?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the members of council. Yes, absolutely. This is not just isolated to Orillia. We do use amateur radio and ham radio operators because they are able to set up their network. We have the ability to have them patch in through our communications tower here at 500 Gill Street. And we do absolutely use them because their network is worldwide, and they have been used in emergencies before to be able to set up a communications and even a form of network in an emergency situation where our typical cell signals will, it's not as much an issue now with the infrastructure, but if the cell system goes down, or if it is quote unquote flooded and you're unable to get out, that's another means that we have to be able to communicate in the background. So we do engage with them to be able to make sure we have any means of communicating available, even outside of what's normal, when normal doesn't work for us.
Thank you very much, Jay and Chief. Patricia.
Thank you, Steve. I was thinking about the course that you took, Steve, to the 2-day course, and I took that course as well. And when I was with Vickers, is that the type of training that you were thinking about, Brent? Because it certainly was a very valuable 2 days, and it included tabletop exercise as well, which I think could be helpful for members of council.
I believe that's particularly for the emergency management group. Chief, you want to weigh in?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that is correct. That is typically for the mayor and or alternates to the mayor on the emergency control group. That's why we were wanting to set up about a half-a-day course that was a bit abbreviated, but still would have most of those components. We could certainly unpack a tabletop type of exercise on top of that if that was the wish of council, understanding and recognizing the demands on their time. We want to be sensitive of that, but also provide you with the information and the opportunities that you need to be aware of as well.
And the possibility of adding a tabletop exercise to it might be helpful. It does help put things in context. Thank you. Any further questions, comments, discussion? I will call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And thank you very much for that, Chief Bruce and Brent, and we'll see you soon. Okay, we're on to inquiry motions, and we have one being brought forward by Councillor Follis. And Jay, if you want to introduce it, then I will ask for a mover and a second.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'll be looking for a seconder on this. It's to look at the feasibility of implementing a reserve dedicated to covering the costs of the potential implementation of a climate change action plan, as well as any efforts to reduce our carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions, and just generally become more environmentally sustainable. And so this was a personal project that I kind of took up, and I thought it's something that we should really look at. And I've had some conversations with first Jim Lang when he was treasurer prior to the break, and now with Lockie Davis. And just from talking with both of them, I'm given to understand, I believe Lockie Davis is about to, I believe he'll provide a bit more kind of context to this, but I believe he's going to be doing a review of some of the reserves we have in place. So this kind of fits in with some of the reviews that he's doing, so it shouldn't be too far out of his way in terms of what he's going to be looking at. Yeah, I think if we do end up going forward with the creation of this climate change action plan, I really believe this could be an important tool in addressing some of the costs that could be contained within that. And just generally speaking, as we start to talk about climate change and looking at ways we can address it, I think it's really important to look into the future and kind of see this as a potential tool that could build up to help us kind of fight some of those issues. So I thought I'd bring this to the fore, and yeah, I hope I can get a seconder on this to move it forward, just to look at the feasibility of doing this at this point. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jay. It looks like I'm offered a second, but it looks like it's not necessary. So I think I got David seconding it. So moved by Jay, seconded by David, that the committee recommends the council that staff be directly prepared to the feasibility of establishing a climate change reserve for consideration as part of a 2022 draft budget that would then be accessed to offset future costs that emanate from any recommendations proposed within the climate change action, as well as fund initiatives that will support the city efforts to reduce its carbon footprint, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and become environmentally sustainable. I've got a couple questions on that, but I'll go first. I think I've got Ralph.
Okay to talk, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Tim, Ralph, and then Ace. Go ahead, and then I'll with you, Ralph.
So am I speaking or is Tim?
Tim, if you can hear me, you have the floor.
Sorry, Mayor Clark. I don't know if it's happening with everybody, but your microphone is breaking up. Anyway, I'll assume I'm the man. Anyway, if you need a seconder, I'll second this. I'm not sure if you got one there. I couldn't quite hear. But I'm just wondering, is there? And I'll certainly support the idea. I'm just wondering, is this just taking one step that we don't need to take? This is actually asking staff to come back with a report as to the feasibility of doing this, which I'm assuming you can create reserves for anything. So I assume staff is going to have a very short report coming back saying, yes, this is feasible. I'm wondering, Jay, if you might want to I think we almost get into a report then, but if somebody in the clerk's department can maybe speak to it, I wonder if there's any faster way, because I'd be more than happy if we just simply had that reserve option presented at budget. I'm not sure we need to know it's feasible or not.
It's not a bad question. I will go to the clerk's department. Earlier, Councilor Eamon talked about budget consideration over time for pollinating, for example, and to me, this actually links to that actually links to this particular suggestion. So, Madam CEO, if you digested the last few comments, if you could comment. So.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In actual fact, I was just going to ask Amanpreet, who I did see pop up, and I guess he saw me pop up. So if he could turn his camera back on and perhaps just advise members of council about what Lockheed's work plan is, because he is working on a reserve policy. And so perhaps Amanpreet can speak to the timing of that.
Great. Thank you, Madam CEO. Amanpreet, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mayor Clark, and through you to members of council. Yes, one of the projects that our new city treasurer is looking at is an overhaul of the reserve system and what sort of reserves we have. And this request will be looked within that bigger framework of what exactly should exist and what should not exist, and how many reserves should exist and what makes sense. Another I think a touch point for this particular request is that my initial impression from a legal point of view is that we might be looking to encroach upon the federal government's jurisdiction. And this could be seen as an indirect taxation, but those are just my very initial comments. We will have to look at the legality of what the municipality is and is not able to do. But we will certainly come back with the feasibility aspect.
So I'm clear from the chair, you're satisfied with the wording of this request?
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Amanpreet. I do believe I have Ralph and the patient, Ralph Sapola. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm a strong believer in climate change and that kind of stuff that we can do. We have sustainable Orillia. My concern is that the next 2 years are going to be very critical to our community regarding funds, dollars and cents. I agree with Tim's concept that do we really need to put a reserve? We have excellent staff that are working right now on the environment and all the things we need to do to change climate change and eliminate some of the stuff that greenhouse gases and everything else. Mr. Shell and his staff are doing an excellent job. I think we'll be dictated, as Amanpreet said, by the provincial and federal governments will dictate to us what we do. So I can support it without the recommendation of going for a reserve. Like I said, it's going to be very critical the next 2 years with the way our funds are used. And this is because staff is already doing a great job of this. I don't think we need a reserve. So I'd like to see if we can amend it to take the word reserve out of it.
Just before automation, because I have him next in queue, and I think Tim wants to jump in on this. So what I am hearing here, though, Ralph, is that looking at the feasibility of implementing a reserve in the climate change in the context of what Lockheed is doing to review the systems, it seems to satisfy staff and will bring forward ideas that will either suggest that you're going in the right direction or that we do need a reserve. So for the chair, I'm satisfied that that seems to be a direction that makes sense. I wasn't before I heard some of the comments, but I am now. So Tim, did you want to respond directly to Ralph?
Yeah, just to clarify, I wasn't trying to make the point to not create a reserve. I was simply making the point that there may be an easier way to get at this, but I'm satisfied with staff's response that this is part of a larger effort, and we will get a fulsome report on all the reserves, and this will be added to it. So I'm okay with that.
Just a quick question. Somebody having, is it okay? Can you hear me okay? Maybe if I talked better, you'd probably hear me better. No issues?
It's like, Mr. Mayor, it's like watching a bad foreign film.
Well, Councilor, I'm going to have to take your word for that, and maybe you can give us a report on that at some point. Thanks for that comment, though. Mason, would you please rescue this conversation and jump in here?
Sure, through you, Mayor Clark, happy to support this motion moving forward. It's only makes logical sense to make a reserve for this. Folks, including Councillor Sapola, voted in favor of creating a climate action plan and putting money towards creating a climate action plan. So if we're not going to put money towards, the future of actually doing some of that action plan, then why did we vote to spend money on building a plan in the first place? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense in that regard. And we're not saying we're going to spend a lot in there. Hopefully the plan comes back and says, hey, we're right on the right train of thought and we're doing all the things that we need to be doing in order to do that. But I'm sure that there's going to be things that do come up, and it's important that if we're going to be spending money in the future, which I'm sure is the case for some of these things, that we have it coming out of a reserve that it is meant to come out of, as opposed to just saying, oh, let's do a one-off and another one-off and things like that. So I think it's just a logical request from Councillor Follis. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Mason. Just for clarity, Councillor Lauer, which board filmmaking of? There's 4 of them in the series. Well, on your answer, I'd like that particular series as well. Ralph, you had hit, then I go to Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not saying that we don't eventually have a reserve for this, but I think the federal government is going to come up with grants for us to deal with climate change, which I totally support. I think, like I said, the next 2 years from the city's funds are going to be so critical because of COVID-19, how we use those funds to do some of the projects. So I'll wait until we see how much money is available for the reserve. But I do support the climate change if we can take out that a reserve be mandated. So this actually mandates that we put a reserve for 2022. And 2022 is going to be hard enough on citizens of Orillia, so that I don't think it's appropriate to put a reserve aside today.
So I hear your reservations about that reserve. Do you want to bring us home in this conversation?
Me? Okay. Thank you, Mayor Clark. Sometimes I think we get confused about what we're talking about. We've got, if we're putting together a climate action plan for the city, that will lay out all of the things, the opportunities that we have, and I assume we'll give some kind of a time frame to them. When we do that, once we've got that, then there are a variety of ways that we can finance what we do. We could finance it by setting up a reserve and drawing from that. We could finance it out of the capital works that we, $15 or $20 million a year that we draw from the taxpayer for capital. We could debenture that kind of work. We could seek grants from the various agencies that do granting in this area. So my point would be that I think, the direction that my colleague, I believe, is going is he wants to make sure that we underline the fact that the climate action plan is important to the city, and that that we will, in fact, when we come to budget, we will finance it. But a reserve is only one tactic. And now I'm comfortable in supporting this because what it does is it really pushes on to the treasurer the consideration of whether a reserve in this particular case fits into our reserve strategy. But again, our reserve strategy is a function of our financing of all the programs we have, and they're all integrated. So in that sense, it's a bit narrow, but I think the heart is in the right place in terms of where we want to go. And I would be looking to this reserve to draw the funds for the pollinator gardens that I would be lobbying for in the future. So.
Great, thank you. Good final comments. I have a mover in Councillor Follis, or Jane, a seconder in David. Any further, do I have anybody else in queue? I don't. Any further questions, comments, or discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Announcements. Pat and Mason.
Yes, today is February the 22nd, which is the anniversary of the birthdays of both Lord and Lady Baden-Powell, who were the founders of the Boy Scouts and Girl Guide movements. And in normal circumstances, this is a day that would be celebrated around the world as Thinking Day. So I would just like to give a shout out to all the Girl Guides and Boy Scouts around the world, as they would normally celebrate this day of thinking of each other and doing all the good turns and good work that they do around the world.
Thank you much for that. Mason.
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark, I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody on council who took part in Coldest Night of the Year, as well as out in the community. It was phenomenal to see people at random times, even though, we weren't doing all a big walk together, but there was people walking throughout the whole day, throughout the city. So that was really nice. And people even walking outside the city. But the big thing was raising much needed funds. And I think the last number I saw, I believe, was around $168,000 that they raised, which is wild. So, and their limit or their set target was about 135,000. So it's pretty crazy how they smashed through the ceiling on that one. So I just wanted to say a big congratulations to all those folks.
Indeed, thank you for that, Mason. Incredible achievement during at any time, certainly during COVID. Okay, I don't see any other arms in the air for announcements. Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have anybody in queue for open public forum? Do not. Thank you very much. Just a reminder to our viewing audience that you do have that ability to address council at the end of council committee. And council, correct? Just let me change that. And the information is on the website if you wish to do so. With that being said, I will thank our staff for putting this meeting together, and members of council for some great dialogue, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn. I didn't think I was good yet. Mover there for a second. So moved by Ralph, seconded by Tim. All in favor? Thank you. It passes, and stay safe, and we will talk soon.
Stay safe, everyone.
See you guys. Thanks.